Okay, good morning, everyone. You're all very welcome along this morning. Shen, you can use the presentation mode there. You can use the full screen at that point. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us this morning. My name is Stephen Kelly. I'm Chief Executive of Manufacturing Northern Ireland. This is the latest in our series of webinars alongside the Trader Support Service on the support that they can provide companies who are moving goods from Great Britain into Northern Ireland as part of the process involved with the Northern Ireland Protocol. This session is about special customs procedures, which is some new features that the Trader Support Service are able to roll out now in support of businesses who are moving goods from Gbtn. It'll not be relevant for everyone, but it'll certainly be relevant for a lot of manufacturers out there. So we hope that this morning is helpful for you in terms of understanding those customs procedures and ensuring that you can take whatever advantage that is possible from these procedures to assist your business and to make life that bit simpler. Joined this morning with colleagues from the Trader Support Service. I think we're being led by Shanker Singham this morning, but his other colleagues, Doreen, John, and Shenali on the call as well, who assist with the questions and answers. We're recording this session because we find that people like to kind of go over the details a bit later on. So we'll be able to share this recording with everybody who's on this call, those that have registered but not able to make it this morning, and the wider manufacturing community also. Do let us have your questions as we go through. What we always like to do is to try to have general questions rather than specific bespoke questions to your business, because we want to try to make it as relevant for everybody who's online this morning or watching the recording later. So if you are posting a question, do try to make it as general as we possibly can, so that it's beneficial to as many people as possible. If you do have a very specific question, the Trader Support Service and indeed HMRC have people on hand to help answer those specific queries that you may well have. And I'm sure Shanker and the team would be more than happy to assist you. If you get in touch with us, we can put you in touch with them if you don't have direct contact with them. I'll hand over now to Shanker and the team from TSS to take us through the presentation. Shanker, over to you.
Great, thanks very much, Stephen. Great to be here again, and looking forward to the session. As Stephen mentioned, we've got a lot of people in the background who are answering your questions, so keep them coming in the course of this. I'm going to ask Shenali to kick off with the initial sort of intro. We're going to do a quick recap on Trader Support Service and some of our functionality, and then we'll get into the special customs procedures more specifically.
Great, thanks Shanker. Hi everyone. So I'm Jashani. I work as a consultant within the TSS consortium, predominantly doing a lot of work within the stakeholder engagement space along with Shanker. As Stephen said earlier, we've got a couple of colleagues on. So you've got Doreen Crawford and John Bowater, who are some of our specialist customs consultants who are really there to provide that kind of more hands-on support. So if you do have any sort of like slightly stickier questions, they'll be able to answer it throughout the presentation, and then we'll have a bit more of a dedicated Q&A towards the end. So if you have any of your slightly more simpler questions, or you want to be directed to gov.uk or any of the TSS guidance, please get those questions in now and we can make sure they're sort of done before we get to the end. So as we said, the aim of today is to kind of give you that bit more of a background on the new custom special procedures that TSS now supports. As of, I think it was the 26th of August, we went live with this release. And there were certain things you could do before in terms of returned goods relief, etc. But we're just going to kind of cover the brand new set of special procedures that we support, how we support them, and what they'll look like on your TSS declaration if you do use us to declare. A couple months ago, we went through a slightly more detailed presentation on return goods relief and inward processing. So today's session won't focus as heavily on those, but as you can see there on the agenda, we're going to also look at temporary admission, onward supply relief, what your IP declaration would look like if you were to declare it on the TSS, and then if it was paired with an entry or exit into a customs or excise warehouse, what does that look like also? So we're just going to begin with sort of a recap as ever of what the TSS does, what does the process look like, and what are the declaration types. So probably not as needed to this group, as we've done quite a lot of presentations with manufacturing NI, but always worth just sort of heading back to basics. So as you know, the TSS is a free-to-use government service there to support with all the new administration requirements, customs declaration, import requirements that came into effect in line with the Northern Ireland Protocol this year on the 1st of January 2021. We are contracted by HMRC, and the view is very much TSS was there to kind of help with that immediate sort of intake of new steps, and we will eventually exit the market. So we are a temporary service, so always just worth bearing that in mind. But in terms of what we actually do, a huge amount of TSS's focus is to ensure that traders feel guided and supported in all of the new requirements that they now need to do as part of the new customs processes. So to that end, we have created a huge education site known as NICTA, or the Northern Ireland Customs and Trade Academy.uk. You'll see lots of links to NICTA throughout the presentation. We'll of course share the slides with you, so please visit NICTA if you haven't already. We've got quite a range of material on there, from data guides, step-by-step user guide, demonstrations of slight short ones that take you through just what the declaration looks like, much longer demos, webinars. All of the sort of guidance that we have is all publicly available for free on NICTA. So we do urge you to go and check it if you haven't already. And then stood behind that is, of course, the actual TSS platform. So we are a completely digital service, we've really away from sort of the legacy paper systems. So everything is done via our portal, which is the tradersupportservice.co.uk. Hopefully most members on the call are registered and you're sort of comfortable with what the TSS portal looks like. But if you haven't already, you're still able to register, get online and take a look at what the portal looks like. And this is where you would save all of your declarations. It's how you submit them. We interface to all the government systems 24 hours, 7 days a week. So you're really able to kind of fit declaring your goods, submitting any declarations. As I said, you can keep them in draft form any time of the day and night. It doesn't have to run 9 to 5. And then finally, behind all of that, if at any point you do need that kind of more human support, we have set up a huge contact center of a few hundred agents who are sort of triaged. So you have tier 1s who deal very much sort of with your sort of inbound call center queries. You have the tier 2s who have a few years of customs experience, and they're really there to help with the case management side of things. So can we help point you towards the right guidance? Do you need some help figuring out what the portal looks like? Or can we actually put you towards some of our more specialist teams who sit within our tier 3 group, who are sort of around 50 or 60 specialist consultants that have years and years and years of industry experience, and they're really there to sort of walk you through that, check what's actually going wrong, why are these error codes coming up, have you declared things in the right way, are you using the right preference, etc. So that's what the TSS does do. Just a quick note on what the TSS doesn't do, because we do serve the entire market of traders moving goods from Great Britain to Northern Ireland, which last time we checked was over 42,000 registered traders. We can't really provide that sort of personalised approach that a customs broker would typically do. So we do sort of urge you, if you are looking for a much more sort of bespoke service, someone to check your entire business, let you know what's the most economically advantageous routes, should you set up a customs warehouse, etc., it may be worth reaching out to a customs agent or intermediary, as they're really are there to have stood up that sort of level of support in a commercial basis. And then the final note is, if you are moving goods that sort of fall out of the non-standard scope customs, so are you moving excise goods? Do you need an export health certificate to move your food products? Are you moving endangered things? Do you need a CITES permit? All of those sorts of things that fall within the goods movement, we can't raise for you, but we'll tell you exactly why you need them, how you obtain them, and where you might need them in your end-to-end journey. So just a quick look at the TSS service metrics. We're really proud of the service we've stood up. We've now moved over 2 million declarations total. As you can see, over 1 million consignments have now moved since we went live, which, all things considered with COVID, etc., it has been quite an impressive amount of goods, and it's nice to see the numbers are sort of steadily increasing. As you can see, we've been 100% available, which for a system of our size is also something to be really proud of. And the final thing I want to draw your attention to on this slide is, if anyone on the call is somebody who moves goods in kind of a bulk volume, so lots and lots of similar goods or giant sort of bulk loads of goods, it might be worth talking to our bulk upload API team, which essentially would allow our API interface to talk to your businesses. And then you can just push and pull the data, meaning you don't need to be manually keying in the declarations if it is the same types of goods moving all the time. And the reason that could be really useful is, for example, we had a trader move 20,000 declarations in one weekend as part of their backlog movement. So it could be really useful if you are moving thousands of goods like that. And then again, just some more happy stats for you to read at your leisure. So what does the process look like again? So typically we talk about the 3 main declarations. So you've got your entry summary or your ENS safety and security declaration, which, as we know, is sort of the safety and security declaration you need when entering the EU security zone, which Northern Ireland forms part of. This will typically be done by your haulier or your carrier, as it includes the vehicle information also, as we'll see on the next slide. Until now, TSS had split the import declaration into a simplified frontier, which we automatically completed for you once using the ENS data, and then the supplementary declaration, which was completed by the trader at any time after the delivery had made up till the 5th working day of the following month. So it kind of gave you a bit of time to get used to the movement. What we are now saying is you can also do a full frontier declaration, which instead of splitting it, it's the full import declaration done at the beginning of the journey. And that's really what we're talking about when we're looking at our custom special procedures. You will have to declare them under a full frontier declaration as part of the way the TSS build works. So just something to be aware of. You can continue to use the split journey or the simplified journey for any of your standard goods movements. But if you do want to use custom special procedures, we are talking about the full frontier. So what does that actually look like? So you'll remember this is what our normal simplified declaration process looks like. Step 1 is always double check your Incoterms. Do you know who's doing what? As this could be, this could change who it is that's actually the importer of record or who it is that's raising the import declaration on TSS. So for example, the model is built on the NI buyer being the importer of record. So typically it's the NI buyer who will be logging onto TSS. And once their carrier has completed the safety and security or the ENS declaration, what they'll normally need for that is the Ietroi number, which is like the business identification number of the buyer and the seller. So who the goods are come from, who the goods are going to, a basic description of the goods. And then you'll also, as I said, will need the vehicle information. If then once your haulier has completed that, TSS then uses the exact same data set to automatically complete the simplified frontier declaration for you. So once the ENS is submitted, we send it to the government system, which in this case is ICS Northern Ireland. We then use the exact same data set to automatically complete the simplified frontier declaration for you, and that gets sent to CDS, which is the custom system operating in Northern Ireland. At that point, your haulier will then take the clearances, which are known as movement reference numbers. I'll apologise now as ever for all the acronyms, but they will get one of each of those. So one for the ENS, which is the security declaration, and one for the simplified frontier, which is the first half of the customs declaration. And they will then log that into GVMS, which is another government system which tracks the movement across the Irish Sea. So they'll put those into GVMS, which will then say, if those are validated, you've done your compliance, here is a barcode known as a goods movement reference or a GMR. That's really important because when your haulier goes to board the ferry on the GB side, so for example at Liverpool to go to Belfast, that's what the ferry operator will require to allow them to board. Once that is scanned, TSS then knows the goods have moved, your journey is actually ongoing, and we will then notify you, whoever the trader is, to say, we know your goods have moved, please log back onto the TSS system to complete your supplementary declaration. And as I said, it's really important to know your Incoterms here, because if you're moving goods under an Incoterm known as DDP, delivered, duty paid, or DAP, delivery at place, it might be your GB supplier who's actually the importer of record and is the person who needs to raise the declaration and pay the import duties. So that's kind of what we've spoken to you about before. Only thing to note here is when we're talking about full frontier declarations, which is the full declaration that needs to be done before the goods move, as you can see, it just changes the steps ever so slightly. So once you figured out who it is that's doing what here, your carrier or your haulier will still be the person who will typically raise the ENS, but what they will do this time is they'll click ENS only, which will stop TSS from automatically completing the declaration for you. So once they've done the ENS, you as the trader can then log on and complete your full frontier declaration. And that's really important because you'll need to put in a lot more information about the movement. If you are moving it under a custom special procedure, you'll need to use certain procedure codes, etc., which we'll come on to in a second. And then you'll need to pay any duty if required up front. And then at that point, the movement references are provided back and your carrier continues the journey, does all the normal steps to get their goods movement reference. But then there's nothing you're required to do once the goods are delivered, unless there's something to do with your procedure. So sorry, it's a bit of a whistle-stop tour because we've got lots to get through, but just to kind of help you identify, that's the difference here. The full frontier or the FFD will need to be done up front. And then just a reminder before I hand over to Shanker, if you are at any point struggling with your supplementary declarations, or you want to know kind of what you need to do for your full frontier declaration, just a reminder on what your tariff options are. You know, we've done loads and loads of webinars on this, and we recently refreshed this if you would like to go look on NICTA. But essentially your steps are, do my goods have a zero tariff, in which case there will be no duty applicable? Can I be registered under the UK Trader Scheme? That's the scheme that essentially says I move goods within the UK, i.e. only GB and NI, and I can prove that, and you have very evidence to show you how your supply chains work, where the goods are being checked in at stores, etc. That means my goods are not at risk of entering the EU or entering the Republic of Ireland, and therefore my goods aren't subject to a tariff because they're moving within the UK. So that's really important to know if you can get authorised on the UK Trader Scheme. It's a really, really useful way to making sure that your goods don't attract any tariffs. If for any reason you can't be on the UK Trader Scheme, have you looked to see if the EU-UK Trade and Cooperation Agreement, does it allow me to claim preferential tariffs based on my good that I'm moving and reduce my tariff to zero? If you would like to know more, again, I know this is quite a lot, please do check our webinar on this. And then finally, if none of those others apply, and actually you don't move goods very often into Northern Ireland, or they're at quite a low value, you might be able to just say you can claim the waiver, which essentially allows you to say, my goods don't move very often, they're at a very low risk to the EU, so actually we'll just waive the import duty. And there's a form that you can fill in with HMRC for that. And then finally, if none of those apply, your goods will be at risk, they will be subject to the tariff, unless, of course, you use a custom special procedure, which is the point of this presentation. So on that note, I will hand over to Shanker.
Great, thanks very much, Shenali. And before we get immediately into the special procedures, just one quick side note on the UK Trader Scheme and the easements. You'll all have seen the extension, the standstill extension of all the easements. Those are both the DEFRA easements, i.e. all the agricultural related, SPS related easements, like the Stand Me program and so on, but also all the HMRC customs easements have also been indefinitely extended for the lifetime of the negotiation. So the idea was that the negotiation wouldn't be conducted against the backdrop of easements about to end. So the main one for the UK Trader Scheme is the easement on the requirement for permanent establishment in Northern Ireland. So that is not required at the moment, and there will be, when whatever is negotiated between the EU and the UK, there will be reasonable notice with respect to when that comes in. And reasonable notice is defined by the reasonableness, or the length of the notice is defined by how different the negotiated arrangement is from whatever people are doing at the moment. But the message, the key message here is whatever we were doing, whatever you were doing with TSS before that announcement, you carry on doing. So sort of business as usual until we are notified otherwise as a result of that negotiation. So with that, if we can just go to the next slide, we're going to talk about these special procedures. So we're in the bit of the presentation, and I apologize in advance. There's no way of explaining this to you without it appearing to be quite complicated. But remember that this is only applicable if you can't get into, if you're trying to ensure that you don't have a tariff to pay, and you can only do it. None of the other options that Shenali just outlined apply to you. In other words, you can't be on the UK Trader Scheme. You can't use the waiver. The tariff is not zero. If you're in those categories, then you may need to use special procedures in order to ensure that the tariff is the tariff that you pay is zero. And we're going to go over what those special procedures are. And if you use these special procedures, you may be able to either get relief if it's a relief. So return goods relief in there is not technically a special customs procedure, it's a relief. But the effect is ultimately the same. that you will not have to pay the customs duty, the import VAT, or the excise tax if you use these procedures until your goods actually go out into free circulation in Northern Ireland. So just as a quick summary of those, customs warehousing, so essentially for goods not in free circulation in GB or NI can be stored without the payment of customs duties, and if applicable, excise or import VAT as well. Inward processing, and we had a whole presentation. We have a lot of material on the NICTA website, including our material on inward processing relief. Inward processing allows for the payment of customs duties, import VAT and excise duties to be suspended on goods moving into Northern Ireland while processing takes place. Outward processing allows for the temporary movement of goods out of Northern Ireland for processing or repair. So for example, going into GB and to move the processed products into NI while retaining domestic status. And there's partial relief from import duties available with outward processing. Return goods relief, and I'm going to, we did a extensive presentation on this again on the NICTA website. So return goods relief allows you to claim duty or VAT relief on goods being re-imported, goods moving EU, GB, NI, for example. This is going to be quite important for a lot of people, but you need to get ahead of this if you're going to use this. You can't sort of wait until you're doing the supplementary declaration. If you think that you have a particular journey where you could claim return goods relief, in other words, where you're going EU into GB and free circulation, and then you're moving into Northern Ireland, and there would ordinarily be a duty, but you could have essentially not pay that by using return goods relief. You need to have certain evidence of the EU to GB movement, and you need to be doing this on a frontier on a full frontier declaration, not the SFD to subdec process that is the majority process for standard goods for TSS type activities. So you need to know all that ahead of time. If you think you're a candidate for return goods relief, please get in touch with us. Please get in touch with the help desk, and we'll put a team around you to help you figure out what it is that you need to do in order to do that, and how to make that happen. And as I say, I'll be going over that later on today, but we also have a lot of material on this on the NICTA website. Temporary admission is also going to be very important for a lot of people. That allows goods to be moved into Northern Ireland temporarily for a period of up to 24 months with a total relief from import duty. That is going to be quite important for things like trade shows, events, that sort of thing. And because we're sort of coming out of COVID, thank God, we're going to see a lot more events in the future. And they're probably kicking off again now. Authorized use is one of the things that you need to prove in order, for example, if you're doing inward processing, you need to prove authorized use. And it allows for customs duties to be charged at a reduced or nil rate. But the goods, so for example, goods going into inward processing have to be put to a prescribed use, and they have to be processed within a specific period of time. So as you'll see when we do inward processing in greater detail, you can't just leave something in inward processing forever and not worry about what happens to it. You need to be able to track what's going on. Some of these processes require quite detailed record keeping, and so you need to think about whether you're in a position to do that, to have that record keeping in place, because if you don't have it in place, there can be consequences and penalties. So you need to think about whether this is the right thing for you. And again, if as a result of this presentation there's any of these processes you think, well, maybe I should be using this, if you haven't used these processes before, again, please reach out immediately to the contact center. We'll put a team around you to discuss what you need, whether it makes sense for you to do this. If we go to the next slide, please. These processes that we're going to talk about are TSS offers these processes on the full Frontier Declaration. So the full Frontier Declaration came in the last release, so it's there, it's available, ready to be used. You need it for these processes. So this means that you will have to declare your goods moving under a special customs procedure. You'll need to use the correct customs procedure code and additional procedure code. You need this information before your good moves across the frontier. This is very different from the SFD to subdec process, where you didn't need to worry about any of that until it comes time to do the supplementary declaration. If you're going to use these processes, you need to do that on the FFD. So the procedure code is the 4-digit code, which identifies the customs and also excise regime, which the goods are being entered into or removed from. The additional procedure code is a 3-digit code, which identifies unique circumstances which might apply. So for example, a duty relief, there would be a 3-digit code for that. And you might require more than one additional procedure code, depending on what the use of the goods actually is. So we've got guidance available on the procedure codes and the additional procedure codes online, and we've got links to them there. And if we go to the next slide. Those of you who are familiar with the chief system, the CDS system is different, and the CDS system divides the CPC codes from chief into two. And those are the procedure codes, 4-digit codes, and the additional procedure codes, the 3-digit code. Now, each code has its own set of conditions and restrictions, the sort of simple takeaway from this slide is that you find these conditions in the procedure and additional procedure completion notes. And there is a specific place in the tariff guide where you can find those completion notes. If we go to the next slide. So, and this is where you find them. So Appendix 1, Volume 3 of the for CDS of the UK tariff is where you find those completion notes for procedure codes, and the completion notes for the additional procedure codes can be found in Appendix 2 of Volume 3 of the tariff. So there are, and again, I apologize that there's really no way of explaining this to you without going into this level of detail, and I appreciate that for some of you this is not necessary for you because these special procedures aren't going to be used. Again, if there are questions, there will be questions. They may be very specific to your business. Please reach out to the contact center. And again, we'll put a team around you to help you understand this. So TSS filters additional procedure codes when you select your procedure, and so there is a matrix that shows you how how that works. And TSS, while it supports a number of these different procedures and a number of these different procedure codes and alternate and additional procedure codes, it doesn't support all of them. That's part of the build. That is in, we're constantly in a state of building and releasing new functionality for TSS. So it's important to understand whether your particular process is, or the process that would be useful for you is actually supported by TSS. So we go to the next slide. So how do you navigate this? So essentially, the way to look at this is there are a number of procedure code series. This is looking at the procedure codes themselves in Appendix 1 that relate to specific procedures. So, for example, the 01 series is onward dispatch. The 07 series is excise or warehouse. The 40 series, the 40 series is release to free circulation. So 4000, we know that that's free circulation. 42 series is onward supply relief. 44 series is end use. 51 series is inward processing, 53 series is temporary admission, 61 series is reimportation of goods, 71 series is customs warehousing. So when we talk about the 4 digits that start 71 and then XX or 42XX, we're talking about that particular process, and you'll need to know what the process is that you're using, and then you'll figure out okay, so that's the particular series procedure code. That's how you understand how to use the procedure codes and the additional procedure codes. And if we go to the next slide. So when we talk about additional procedure codes and the additional procedure completion notes in Appendix 2, there are 2 kinds of additional procedure codes. There are union codes. Now, bear in mind that the UCC applies, union being the Union Customs Code. The UCC applies in Northern Ireland. That union series is given in the following way. So inward processing will be A. Outward processing will be B. The reliefs are at C. The temporary admission is a D series, agricultural products is E series, and others are F series. So if we go back to, I mean, keep the slide where it is, Shenali, but if you remember, inward processing was a 51 series in terms of the Appendix 1 procedure codes. Inward processing is A series for the additional procedure codes, and you need both of them. Then you have the national series, where you've got the first character is a number, followed by 2 alpha code representing the description of the procedure. If you have an additional procedure code of 000, that is an indication that no other additional procedure code applies. So if we go to the next slide. And again, you will not need to know all of these things in order to use a particular procedure. You know, what you will do is you will say, this is the particular procedure we need to use, and we can help you figure out what the procedure code, additional procedure code is, which series we're talking about, and so on. It is important, however, for you to know what procedures are not currently supported by TSS. So the ones that are not currently supported, Onward Supply Relief 42 series, we support those procedures unless there is specific use of a tax representative. Customs Warehousing 71 series, we support entry into a private customs warehouse, but not a public customs warehouse. And then Onward Dispatch, the 01 series, we don't support onward dispatch procedures at the moment. If we go to the next slide. So when it comes time to do that full frontier declaration, you need to choose either the pre-lodged, which is the IMD version, or the arrived full frontier declaration, IMA, depending on the requirements of the procedure code. The procedure code will tell you which of these you need to use, and you can see an example there of a full frontier declaration and what it looks like on the portal. So if we go to the next slide. So which type of declaration are you trying to make? So there are 4 different options that TSS sort of offers now. So is it released to free circulation? Well, we know about that. That's the 40 series 40 XX. Onward dispatch, excise warehouse, onward supply relief, end use, reimportation of goods, and that will include the return goods relief piece of this. Customs warehousing is 71 series, temporary admission 53 series, and we're processing 51 series. Those are the 4 different options that TSS offers at the moment. If you're declaring your goods moving under special procedures, then you must be acting as a direct representative of yourself or of your business. So if we go to the next slide. Now, some of these procedures and additional procedures codes require a security deposit to be made. And there is functionality for the security deposits to be made. And these include special procedures authorized by declaration. For example, if you've got full authorization, if you don't have full authorization for a special procedure, such as a temporary admission, and then additional procedure codes which specifically require a security, like the D series codes. The D series codes, just to remind you, were temporary admission related codes. Security deposits can only be supported with your own duty deferment account. So there has been a process to, and HMRC has made it much easier for people to get their own duty deferment accounts. However, you could support this with the CDS cash account. There is a CDS dashboard that allows you to have a CDS cash account, or if you're using immediate payment by electronic credit transfer. We go to the next slide. So if you intend to use a security deposit, you've got to declare it in the document code. And 955D is what you would use to declare it in that document reference tab. And there is a payments guide which is linked to there that has further information on using security deposits. And that's section 8 of the payments guide. I'm going to talk a bit about return goods relief now. And while we have done presentations and they are available on NICTA, for return goods relief, I want to spend a bit of time on this because I'm not sure this is widely understood, and I'm not sure people are really realizing that it is available to them. And we know that because we're not seeing the take up on the full fronted declaration that we had anticipated, because it has been live since the 4th of July. So return goods relief is a customs relief that removes the need to pay duty on goods that are being re-imported into the UK. That have previously been exported. They must have been in free circulation in the UK when they were exported, or in GB in the case of an EU to GB to NI movement. In most cases, the time limit for the claim is 3 years of initial export. And you can only claim it as part of the import process. So that's why you have to do the full fronted declaration. And at the time that the goods move from GB to NI, if that's the portion of the journey we're talking about, you need to have evidence of that EU to GB movement. And goods eligible for RGR, goods exported from the UK as free circulation goods, those goods that benefit from agricultural measures, goods exported from the UK following inward processing or exported under temporary admission, and goods declared for outward processing that are unprocessed and in the same state of original export. So if we look at the traders who can, and this is sort of more relevant, if you look at the traders who can benefit from this, if we go to the next slide, there are going to be two categories here. 1A is sort of the more standard way of using return goods relief. There's been the case historically, which is literally, as the name suggests, the return goods. So, if a customer returns from GB, for example, for retailers, that would be return goods relief. Traders that transfer parts or finished goods between sites, and we certainly know that there's quite a lot of that with respect to Northern Ireland manufacturing. So that would be a trader group that could use return goods relief. And the second group, and this is the newer group, and this is where I think there ought to be a lot of you who can benefit from this, but certainly it's not being used to the extent that we had anticipated it would be. And that is traders whose goods would be at risk on entry to Northern Ireland, but they've been exported into GB from the EU. So this is the sort of Percy Pigs situation where you've got a good moving from the EU into GB in free circulation, moving on to Northern Ireland. The problem with that movement is that because the UCC applies to Northern Ireland, the movement without processing from GB free circulation into Northern Ireland is it is a secondary movement. And so, so if you go back to Shenali, I'm going to come back to this. You go back to the original slide we were talking about. Thanks. So just in that case, you would have to pay a tariff. So to avoid paying the tariff, you use return goods relief because it's a return, in a sense, back into a bit of the customs territory to which the UCC applies. And you need to have evidence of that EU to GB movement in order to do it. So we think that that ought to be quite a large number of traders, but we're not seeing take up along the lines we had anticipated. So have a look and see whether that's the kind of thing that does actually apply to you. And if it does, again, contact us immediately and we'll walk you through the process. If you go to the next slide, please. So how do you use it? How do you declare RGR? Well, it's procedure 6110. So you claim the duty, where you're claiming the duty and VAT, if applicable, relief under RGR. You're releasing those goods into free circulation in an unaltered state. There's no processing of these goods. And the goods were previously declared for permanent export, whether or not they're removed from a customs warehouse at the point of export. So they're coming into GB, let's assume in this case. And again, the way you do this is you declare them, the declaration category is pre-lodged. Which type of declaration do you intend to make? It's a declaration for release into free circulation for end use. And the choice that you make of that declaration restricts your options for procedure selection to certain types of codes. Are you using full special procedures authorizations for any goods on this full frontier declaration? That's a question that you'll be asked, and the answer to that is no. And the representation type is indirect. That's the way you use the TSS system in general. So you fill those out. That's how you declare it. Now you're doing this, remember, on the full frontier declaration. So this is not SFD to supplementary declaration. So your thought process should be, does RGR apply to me? Can I therefore not pay a tariff that I would have otherwise had to pay if I wasn't using RGR? And go back to all the other ways that you can not pay a tariff. Zero tariff for European, applied customs rate, UK trader scheme, the state aids provisions in terms of the waiver, all the other things. We are in a world where none of that applies to you, and the only thing you can do are the things we're talking about now. Okay, so I decided that I need to use this. I then do this as a full frontier declaration. This is before the goods move from GB to NI. So we go to the next slide. And what evidence do you need? So the evidence we've said before you need is evidence of movement from EU to GB, and the documentary, the evidence there, we've got a shot of what the documentary code, what you'd enter in terms of the documentary code, the document reference number, and so on, and how you declare the goods at the header level, which is the bottom of those tables, in order to use the full frontier declaration to claim the return goods relief. Don't worry too much about the numbers and the lists and the things. We will, if this is something that applies to you, we will walk you through that initially, so that you understand it. And again, these are very specific to what you're doing. So the document code is one of the documents used as proof for RGR. So 1314 is what you'd be using for RGR. There are other codes that also potentially apply, but that's the main one. The document reference is where you'd be entering the MRN for the export declaration, the C21E, which is another form, or the reference number of the alternate evidence. So remember, when we initially talked about this, we explained that there is alternative evidence that the RGR claim can stand on. You don't need to have the MRN of the export declaration, but if you do have it, then you can certainly put that in as in the document reference field. But if you don't have it, alternate evidence, invoices, etc., that's what you'd be using. Then you type in the document status as appropriate, and then you fill in the header page, as you can see on the bottom left corner. So we go to the next slide. You may also be able to claim VAT relief on an RGR claim. In order to be eligible for VAT relief at the re-import level, the declarant, in other words, when it comes into Northern Ireland, the legal declarant at export and re-import must be the same entity. So that's where that applies. So in other words, it's got to be the same Ietroi number or the same person shown in those different sections. If we go to the next slide. So in summary, RGR can be used to export EU goods to Northern Ireland that were in free circulation in GB. And these are the codes that you can use. And we've listed them there on the slide on your full frontier declaration. The evidence of import, export, and the country of origin can be proved through the MRN itself, a document that proves the goods were previously in the EU, a copy of the export airway bill or bill of lading, commercial certificate of shipment, certificate of posting relating to the export of the goods, a copy of the import invoice, suitable statements from manufacturer or exporter, if other than yourself, preferential origin form EUR1 in certain cases. In the case of collectible items, catalogue information, qualified opinions from collectors, you need the stock record book, potentially that could serve as evidence, and these two forms, 1314 and INF3, which can be used to support claims to relief. Now, there's a lot of information there. I appreciate that. We've got a lot of information. If you visit the gov.uk site, you can see information on RGR. But again, the takeaway from this is that there are certain codes that TSS supports here. And if you think RGR applies to you, the key things for you, first of all, contact the contact center, of course, and we will help walk you through how it specifically relates to you. But you are also going to have to make sure that you have at least some, at least some of this evidence that is needed to evidence the EU to GB movement. That will be the stumbling block for many people. But certainly HMRC has interpreted the rules in such a way that quite a lot of evidence can be used, and you aren't reliant on the MRN for the export. If we go to the next slide, please. So temporary admission. I'm going to spend a bit of time on RGR and temporary admission. We have specific presentations and webinars we're doing on some of the others, so I will go over them briefly, but I do want to spend some time on temporary admission because I think this again is one of those things that does apply to a lot of people. So if we go to the next slide. So the purpose of temporary admission, as it suggests, as the name suggests, is to use when you're moving goods into Northern Ireland for short periods of time. So this could be for a trade show, it could be a cultural event. We know that some of these events are kicking off again, thank God. So so temporary admission is something you can use for this. So you do not need a full customs import declaration if your goods fall within the list below. So pallets, containers, means of transport, personal effects, goods for sports purposes, subject to Article 219 of the UCC, welfare materials for seafarers, medical, laboratory equipment, animals referred to in Article 223, certain types of equipment, organ transplant instruments and apparatus, disaster relief material, portable musical instruments, packaging, radio, TV production, and other goods. And that L category is a sort of broad catch-all, other goods where authorized by customs authorities. And there's a link on the gov.uk website there to temporary admission that illustrates all of those categories. But if you fall into those categories, you do not need a full customs import declaration. You can do a declaration by conduct, which is an oral declaration, and I'll talk about in a second what you need to do, what else you need to do with that. So that's analogous. Whenever you walk through an airport and you go through the green channel, it's not that you're not making a declaration. You're making a declaration by another means or by conduct. You're making an oral customs declaration when you go through the green channel. This is similar to that. If you go to the next slide, please. How do you orally declare your temporary admission movement? Well, you have to do an ENS only declaration, which you can do on the TSS now. You notify HMRC by selecting the drop-down option for oral declaration, and then you fill out the C108 form, which you can find on the gov.uk site. So this isn't a TSS full customs declaration. It's a particular form, the C108, which is on the website there. So that's all you would have to do for those goods. If you go to the next slide, please. If you don't fall within those Article 136 categories, you can still apply for temporary admission authorization, and it will depend on whether you're established inside or outside the UK. And if you want, that's for GB. If you're using temporary admission in Northern Ireland, it'll depend on whether you're established inside or outside Northern Ireland, customs territory of the EU. Northern Ireland, because the UCC applies to Northern Ireland. And just to be clear, obviously we're not saying Northern Ireland is in the customs territory of the EU. It isn't. It's in the UK customs territory, but the UCC does apply to it, so that's why you need to be established in Northern Ireland to do this. Now, additionally, you need to be financially solvent, good history of compliance with customs, and you need to have kept appropriate records. So the temporary admission link for gov.uk for that website is on the bottom of that slide. And if we can go to the next slide, please. How do you become authorized? Well, there are 6 ways of doing it. There's full authorization, there's authorization by declaration, there's an authorization that covers Northern Ireland and the EU, retrospective, oral declaration, crossing the border by another act. So full authorization, you need to have a government gateway user ID and password. You can create one when you apply, and you can apply online for full authorization there. It takes about a month. And you need to fill out separate forms for Northern Ireland and for GB. If we go to the next slide. After you've applied, you'll get a letter that sets out the conditions for your authorization. It may say that you've got to pay customs duties and other charges where they're applicable. You've got to keep detailed records. And there'll be an address for you to write to if you need to amend, renew, or cancel that authorization. And again, for TSS, those are the codes that you'll be putting on your full-fronted declaration for temporary authorization. So if we go to the next slide. How do you claim temporary admission? Again, this is all if you're not Article 136. So 5300, this is the procedure code to claim full or partial suspension from customs duties, and if applicable, excise and VAT, for goods entered into temporary admission where the goods have not been subject to any previous procedure, no warehouses, no other special customs procedure. And that's how you declare it, which type of declaration you intend to make. Declaration for temporary admission, you'd write that down. And then in terms of representation type, as we said before, if you're using this, your representation type would be direct. And again, if it's a public customs warehouse, so everything other than a public customs warehouse, the entry would be direct representation. And of course, TSS does not support processes into public customs warehouses. If we go to the next slide, the authorization identification number, authorization type code, relevant Ietroi number, that's how you would fill in the authorization type. And those are the codes that you would use. If we go to the next slide. So the Supervising Customs Office is shown on the authorization for temporary admission for fully authorized traders, and that's the number you would use there if you're in that category. And these are the numbers again that you would enter for full temporary admission authorization. So if we go to the next slide. And again, the reason we're showing you these things is not that we want you to memorize all of these things and remember all of these code names, the numbers. The purpose of this is to show you, give you a sense of how you enter these things onto the database, onto the portal at the appropriate place. So you enter the authorization number used to enter the goods to temporary admission for holders of full temporary admission authorization, and here are the codes that you use in that case. So additional information, we got a link there to Appendix 4, which is the additional information statement codes for all the details that need to be declared depending on the additional procedure you're in. And we go to the next slide. So again, temporary admission probably affects a lot of people, and certainly will affect people if you're engaged in the trade show business, the cultural events, other events, that sort of the events business. So if you are in that business, please reach out to us because this is designed, for you. Onward supply relief. Go to the next slide. So first of all, what is it? If you sell goods into Northern Ireland for onward supply to an EU country, it's going to Ireland or it's going somewhere else, you might be able to claim VAT relief. And the VAT is then accounted for in the final EU destination. And that's called onward supply relief, OSR. If you move goods GB to Northern Ireland, which are then onward sold to Ireland or another country, EU country, you can claim relief. So you don't pay import VAT into Northern Ireland. You only pay the VAT applicable at the final sale. And we think this probably applies to a fair number of people as well. If we go to the next slide. So how do you claim it? The correct procedure codes are listed there, and that goes on your customs declaration, which remember is a full frontier declaration. Guidance is available at the link on the slide. And in your import declaration, you need to include your VAT identification number, which begins with an FR1, or FR2 if it is a VAT number for a customer in the member state where the goods are going. The expected place and date of onward consignment, the particulars of onward transport, name and address and VAT identification number of the purchaser in the EU country, which is the FR1 prefix followed by the 2-digit country code, your procedure code, your commodity code, and a statement that accompanies the declaration with the appropriate text. If we go to the next slide. So if what's happening is you're claiming a release for free circulation with the payment of customs duties for non-union goods with a simultaneous VAT exempt onward supply to another member state, so you've got GB to NI, the domestic status, you've got to use the NI imp for the header, you recall that there are two potential things you could use for the header, NI-DOM and NI-IMP. NI-IMP is intended for special procedures. So using NI-IMP on the full frontier declaration header, and we got an example of that there in the slide. If we go to the next slide. So the following AI statements may be required in the additional information section. It's that OSR 42 code, and you would enter the name and address details of the party to whom goods are being supplied. And then you enter the country of destination as a suffix to the address there, as you can see it done at the bottom of that slide. And if we go to the next slide, there are additional fiscal references, identification numbers, DE3/40. So you would be entering the information as indicated in the in those two boxes. You enter the VAT identification number issued in the member state of importation for the importer designated or recognized under Article 201 of the VAT Directive as liable for VAT. You've got your ISO Alpha 2 country code. Again, apologies for all of these, all of this terminology, but unfortunately, that is the terminology that is being used. It's simply required for you to fill in these forms in these ways. But again, the takeaway here is if you think you are in this category, if you think you want to claim onward supply relief because you've got goods going into Ireland and you don't want to have to pay the import VAT in Northern Ireland, there is a way that you can not do that if you use onward supply relief, but you need to make this decision, considerably ahead of time. So because it's going to be done on the full frontier declaration. So again, if you think this might apply to you, then get in touch with us and we will walk you through the specifics of this. The purpose of this presentation is just to show you, give you a sense of what the portal looks like and where you would be entering information. And you don't have to call the contact center and get help from our advisors. You can, by looking at this slide deck, by looking at the attached links, you can sort of do it yourself. But we would certainly recommend that if the first step is, if you think this applies to you, call us and we'll walk you through how to do it. Again, it looks very daunting, but once you've done it once, it tends to be repeated, and you'll get the hang of it. FR1 is the code there that is used for an importer established and VAT registered in the UK. It can't be used by a non-VAT registered person. If we go to the next slide. So when can you claim OSR? You can claim it if you're UK VAT registered and you move goods into Northern Ireland from Great Britain or outside the EU for onward supply to this final EU destination country, which for most people, this will be Ireland. The goods dispatched from Northern Ireland are exactly the same. They can't be processed. So OSR does not apply if you're part of a processing supply chain. The goods should be dispatched within a month of the date they were brought into Northern Ireland. There are extensions available, and there's a link there to those extensions. And you comply with the obligations of a person making a zero-rated supply. And there's a link on the left-hand side at the bottom there to gov.uk information about when you can claim VAT relief on goods imported into Northern Ireland for onward supply. We go to the next slide. So after you've claimed the onward supply relief, then you must include the goods on your EC sales lists. You need to record the EU trade figures on your VAT return, and you'll get a demand for import VAT if you don't meet those conditions. And we've got some links there that you can use to find out more about this area. So we go to the next slide. So inward processing, I'm not going to spend very much time on this because we did a separate presentation entirely about inward processing. And there's a lot of information on the NICTA website on inward processing, and obviously we're also running short of time. Very quickly, and I'll zip through these, so don't worry if you haven't seen any of that other material and you're not following, because it is available on the NICTA website, and these slides will be made available to you as well. Inward processing, it's duty suspension, which enables traders to import goods for processing and re-export with the payment of duty and import VAT suspended. If you're authorized to use it, you don't need to pay customs duty and import VAT on goods you import into Northern Ireland or move GB to Northern Ireland and then re-export from Northern Ireland. If you keep your goods in Northern Ireland, then you pay a reduced amount of customs duty and import VAT if the duty rate for the imported components is lower than the imported goods. If we go to the next slide. So in order to apply, there's an application form that needs to be submitted. It can take several weeks, so we're telling people that you need to plan this well in advance. It's going to be done on the full frontier declaration, so you certainly need to plan it, well in advance of goods moving. And there's guidance there at the bottom of that slide. We go to the next slide. There are lots of benefits to this, mainly cash flow related benefits for the import VAT and the import duty, and there's no duty payable for items that are scrapped or exported. If we go to the next slide. What do you need to prove? When they were imported, what was the quantity, import declaration entry, when they were used, what was the quantity used, when all the imported goods have been exported, and you need proof of exportation with the export entry and date. So good record keeping is really critical. If you are going to use this process, you need to have that facility. If you don't, then this is not something you should be contemplating, because the penalties for not complying with record keeping requirements can be significant. We go to the next slide. So the key data for the audit log, this is the information you need to keep. You need to have the import entry details for the goods that have been processed. And when the export entry is received, you need to also put that on your IP log. If we go to the next slide. That's an example. Again, a bit of an eye chart there. You don't need to memorize all of that. It's just an indication of what an IP log looks like and the type of information that you need to include on the log is listed there. So think, for example, D, the name of the clearing agent, E, the airway bill. These are the sorts of things, part numbers, serial numbers. So you can see that it's quite specific to the goods that are moving across, and there's quite a lot of information you need to provide. If you're going, and the next slide has the rest of what's on the IP log. I will call out a couple of things. The throughput start date and the throughput end date are important. The throughput period is what you're authorized to. So the good that goes into inward processing, there's a period of time where it's got to be processed and it's got to be put through the IP process. That is not an indefinite period of time. HMRC will tell you what your throughput period is, and you need to show that you've complied with that throughput period. If we go to the next slide. And that's the procedure code that you'd use. 5100 is the procedure code to claim a suspension from customs duty for goods entering an IP procedure. And you need inward processing authorization for that. How do you declare it? There's a specific appendix there, and that's what it looks like on the portal in terms of how you declare IP. Go to the next slide. So again, on the header level, the authorization identification number of DE339, This is how you declare it on the header level. The bottom slide there is the authorization type code and authorization ID and so on. If we go to the next slide, you would enter, in terms of documentary codes, the country identification number, the authorization type code, and the document reference information, document code, document reference, and document status in the way that you can see declared there. If we go to the next slide. So how do you declare movements into and out of a warehouse? If we go to the next slide. What is a customs warehouse? First of all, a customs warehouse is designed to delay duty and VAT. You'll only pay when goods leave the warehouse and enter free circulation. You will not need to pay duty and VAT if you re-export, so it's particularly useful if things are being exported over into the EU. And you don't need to pay duty and VAT if you move your goods to another customs procedure other than the authorized end use. So to do this, you must be authorized to run the warehouse as a warehouse keeper. If you want to do that, you can look at the link on using a customs warehouse. And bear in mind that TSS only supports the private warehouse movement into and out of a private warehouse at the moment. If we go to the next slide. Customs warehouse can be used to store your goods. And so the goods that are liable to customs duties, excise duties, or import VAT. If the licenses are not available when you import your goods, you obviously need the licenses before anything goes into free circulation. The goods are originally imported to a special procedure, and they're being warehoused before being re-exported. Goods on which duty is not due but import VAT is, for example, or goods that have been released to free circulation. Now, goods that are now in free circulation, which are the subject of a claim under rejected imports arrangements. So you can process goods in a customs warehouse. There's a certain type of processing is allowed. It's known as usual forms of handling. There's a link there to explain, what that means. But if what you're doing is really processing, then inward processing is what you should be using. You shouldn't be using a customs warehouse. If we go to the next slide. So what do you need to do before you apply? Ietroi number, details of where your records are or will be held, type of accounting system you use, and there's a series of other things there that you would need to know before you apply for, and you need to provide it before you apply to use this particular special procedure. If we go to the next slide. So how do you become an authorized warehouse keeper if you think that this is what you need to do? There's an online authorization form, which we've got a link to there. If you're applying for authorization in Northern Ireland and Great Britain, then you need a separate form for each entity, and you can request that by emailing that particular website. And you need to do that with your name, email address, address of your Northern Ireland operation, and your Ietroi number, which is the XI Ietroi number is what you would be providing. And you'll get a response within 5 days and a link to the EU Trader portal where you can access the application form. Go to the next slide. How do you declare the goods? It's a 7100 procedure code, as we said before, and you therefore would declare the 71XX procedure code, and then you would go to the next piece of the portal here. You would be taken to basically identify the warehouse using the DE2/7, enter U for private warehouse. We do not do public warehouses at this time. The supervising customs office needs to be entered, DE5/27. So you'd enter the supervising customs code, supervising customs office code, applicable to where the warehouse authorization is actually held. And then the holder of the authorization identification number. Again, just a reminder there that we don't support the public customs warehouse in that release. So this is all for the private customs warehouse. And then you would enter the appropriate document code from the table below to indicate the customs warehouse authorization held. And you've got the, again, the portal entry, the document code, document reference numbers that you would be adding into that box. And then if we go to the next slide, after you've applied, when you're authorized, you'll get a letter that sets out the authorization conditions. And again, you know, it'll tell you about keeping records, what duties you would have to pay, and how you would amend or cancel your authorization. If you're a private warehouse keeper, there are certain obligations you have: security, control of the goods, cooperating, you know, supervisors of the authorization, and you've got to allow HMRC access to the warehouse premises, your records, and the goods at any reasonable time. And you can find out more in the links at the bottom of that slide there. If we go to the next slide, excise warehouse it's IP, sorry, inward processing, and inward processing to excise warehouse, which is a very specific type of special procedure for excise goods, but we do support, TSS now supports the excise warehouse to inward processing relief process and IP back to excise warehouse. So this procedure can be used to move excise goods imported in bulk, which are processed, and then moved back into the excise warehouse. And typically this applies to things like imported bulk wine or beer that's bottled in the UK. We go to the next slide. So there's no change to the rules relating to holding and movement of excise goods taking place entirely within Northern Ireland. That remains as it was before. Excise duty suspended movements, you still use the EMCS system if you're an excise goods trader. Northern Ireland excise traders will see some changes to EMCS, but broadly, if you're entirely within Northern Ireland, the rules stay the same. If you go to the next slide. So lots of courses that are available on the Full Frontier Declaration, lots of information that expands on what I've talked about just now on the NI Customs Trade Academy website. You've got data guides on the Full Frontier Declaration, on the procedure codes, additional procedure codes, the CDS import completion guide is there for you. But as I say, I think the takeaway from this is this was to give you a flavor of why these are necessary and why you might need to use them. If you think you're in one of these categories, then do reach out to the contact center. We'll put a team around you, as I said, and we'll try and help you figure out which is the right thing for you. If we go to the next slide, I think that's it. So again, apologies for all of the acronyms and codes and numeric codes and everything. I'm afraid that is just how customs works. But again, the major takeaway is if you think this might apply, if you're paying a tariff now that you think you don't need to be paying or shouldn't be paying because you could use some of these procedures, then please get in touch with us and we will help you work that out. I'm conscious that my colleagues have been busily answering questions in the chat, so I presume we've covered off those specific questions, but we've got a few minutes left. So Stephen, happy to use those if there are any other questions or any general questions on TSS.
Thanks, Shanker. And yes, your colleagues have been answering lots of the questions on the chat. There's one or two more here, so we have about 8 minutes or so left. If that's okay, we'll run through those. And I mean, one of the things that these are complex procedures. They're difficult for smaller traders in particular to understand, and TSS is there to help and support that process, as is HMRC from our experience. But would it be wise for people to explore these options and then maybe look at specialist support? I see Frankie's on here from KPMG, for instance, but
yeah,
where can they go to get support?
Well,
is it through their accountancy firms or specialist consultants?
Correct. So certainly your accounting firms, accountants. We do sessions with accountants as well to explain how TSS procedures work. We talk to KPMG and all the other accounting firms who have access to us and will ask us questions from time to time about what TSS is able to do. But yeah, absolutely consult with your specialist advisor. If you don't have a special advisor, or for whatever reason you want to talk to TSS directly, do talk to us. I think for a small trader who's never, there's two classes of people, right? There's the people who've been using this already in some form or other, who are relatively sophisticated and might just want to know what TSS can actually support, and that they will get all of this and they will be able to do it themselves. Then there are traders who've never done any of this before and would only be contemplating doing this because they're paying a tariff and they think they shouldn't be paying a tariff. And actually, there are lots of ways that you can not pay a tariff. Those are the people who I would not recommend you just launch in, armed with the guides and start entering stuff into the portal. Those are the people who either TSS is available to you, but so are your specialist advisors. I definitely would recommend you use them.
Thanks for that. There's a question actually here from Frankie around how can the OSR be used for movements of parcels and packages from Gbtn to ROI when the declaration system has been deferred, so you can't complete the OSR on the declaration, but the goods have already moved. So this kind of falls into the category of kind of grace periods that are in existence at the moment, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Is there a hole there that needs filled, or?
Yeah, so I don't know if one of our OSR specialists is on the line who wants to sort of comment specifically on that, but the general principle with easements or any of those delays on, so first of all, with respect to easements, anything that is subject to any kind of easement from HMRC at the moment, and so that applies to all of them, those are all indefinitely extended during the lifetime of this negotiation. So that's the first thing. In terms of OSR, I don't know who's on from our team who can cover OSR specifically. Doreen, can you answer that question?
Yeah, as best I can. Hi, yeah. Good morning, Frankie. So especially with the FPOs, which you're relating to here, with the easement, there is no record technically at the moment for the goods entering Northern Ireland. But again, there is a requirement because those goods are going to Ireland, and that's specifically, I'm assuming what you mean. With the VAT perspective, the goods will have been recorded correctly because they would have been zero rated, and there is a way to do those FPO movements, and we can give the guidance from Irish Revenue as well. But as for the actual import duty and the duty payment, if it's required into NI, it will follow all the FPO rules that are currently there. So it will need to be declared if it's over £135, and the TSS can do that. If the goods are under £135 and are moving to Ireland via Northern Ireland with an FPO, those declarations for duty are not being made currently.
Yeah, and sorry, and I would just add one thing to that, which is if you are having issues with the Irish Revenue on any of this, let us know, because TSS has a regular set of, we have a regular meeting every couple of weeks with Irish Revenue. We can raise any of these issues, and I'm sure that because of the indefinite extension of easements, that the Irish Revenue will have some, there'll be some issues that need to be dealt with.
Okay, just another one here from Frankie. If temporary admission requires a security deposit, which may be up to the value of the tax or duty liability, is there not going to be is that not going to be prohibitive to use in many cases?
Sorry, can you just repeat that?
So you mentioned in your presentation that there's a deposit, a money set aside, and in many cases that's the same value as the potential tariff there may well be. So obviously from a cash perspective, that is quite challenging for businesses if the money's even been held in escrow or on account.
Yeah, no, it can be. I mean, there are ways of getting, through your bank arrangements of getting security deposits in place. But yeah, it depends how often you are doing this. If you are a regular, so if you're in the events business, for example, and you're a regular user of these sorts of things, then this can make sense for you. But yeah, I take your point. I mean, that's not something we at TSS can do much about, because it's the application of the rule to Northern Ireland, but it would be more for people who are using this on a regular basis. Okay, thanks.
Another just couple of minutes left. There's a lot of support here for people reaching out and seeking that specialist support, which is, I think, advisable. With such complexities, it's better to have a support there to guide you through this stuff. What I think would be useful, Shanker, is just a couple of practical examples that illustrate to people where returns good relief, for instance, is an option, et cetera, et cetera. So if I take just as one, and then we'll finish up with this one. I'm a manufacturer in Northern Ireland. I buy a piece of engineering equipment from a German company, from a German factory, that arrives in Britain under the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, so it's tariff-free, but there's only minor modification done in Britain to that item, so it doesn't establish a UK origin before moving to Northern Ireland, where a tariff may be applied. But that product, that finished processed product, goes back to GB. Is that an example, for instance, a route where returns good relief, for instance, would be very helpful and useful?
Yeah, so it's going to depend on minor modification and what that modification actually is, and then that tends to be quite fact specific. But let's assume that it's not processing, it doesn't qualify for processing. Then you do lose the origin, and you would ordinarily have to pay a tariff from GB to Northern Ireland. So there are lots of ways of dealing with that specific issue. I mean, one thing that you could do, I mean, you could claim return goods relief in that case to avoid having to pay the tariff on GB to NI flow, if you're talking about a total free circulation kind of set of movements. But that sort of flow could also lend itself to it could lend itself to warehousing, so that because you're not you don't want to enter free circulation in GB, and in this case you may not want to enter free circulation in Northern Ireland either until the product ultimately goes to GB and enters free circulation there. So you use warehousing to avoid any tariff flow. But certainly the GB NI portion, you could use return goods relief to avoid paying a tariff in that case.
So I'm using that as an example where one of the biggest challenges that Northern manufacturers are facing is EU products that aren't freely circulating to Northern Ireland, which should be the case.
Yeah.
Because by necessity, they have to arrive in Britain to have minor modification or breaking down into separate parts, or maybe multiple border movements. So I just wanted to use that one because it's probably the biggest challenge manufacturers face. But in your answer, you've made it clear that actually there's a series of these options that removes the risk and removes the liability, and actually makes the process a lot easier for you. But there's a big piece of work to do in terms of establishing these processes and to use those to simplify those challenges that you have.
Yeah, you need to have a holistic view of the whole journey, and what makes sense for the whole journey.
listen, we've gone over our time very slightly. Thank you to you and your colleagues. As I said at the beginning, we've recorded the session, so we'll share it and allow people to view it after the event, and we'll share it with a wider audience as well. Hopefully we've answered most of those questions in the chat as we've gone along, but if there are specific questions, do reach out to Shanker and his colleagues at TSS, or come back through us, and if we can assist you in any way, either directly talking to HMRC or advising in terms of potential third parties to support you, we'll be very happy to do that. Thanks very much for your time this morning. Thanks to Mary and Connor from Manufacturing NI for supporting this as well. We'll see you again.
Great, thanks very much. Bye.